on a week where we were talking about a short field and not as many shifters as we'd like to see. Certainly more shifters than last year, but still, compared to the last race we were all at Supernats, you kind of look at the shifter field and you go, oh, that's a little bit disappointing. But considering that there were four super competitive guys at the front, with some potential, like with Vincenzo coming up in there and almost making it a five kart race at one point, I believe, on Saturday. I just think that, and this is something that, again, I'm an outsider. I don't have a big karting background. I have a big racing background. I love all forms of motorsport. And the more and more kart races I go to, the more and more I realize I absolutely love shifter kart racing. It is so cool. Yes, are the races, as close as X30? Most of the time they're not. But when you get an X30 style shifter kart race, or even just, I just feel like so much in shifter kart racing, there's always just these like jaw-dropping, exciting moments. Even if the entire race, is covered by 4 seconds over the top three, you still got something super entertaining in that 22 lap feature. And I'm just really loving shifter kart racing. I think it's really cool. And personally, I'm kind of disappointed that there's not as much support of it, from a competition standpoint consistently as a grouping like X30. So I guess I'll kind of defer to the folks who have a bigger background in kart racing. I guess I'll start with you, Alex. What does shifter racing got to do to start to kind of build to that X30 style, big fields, constantly having the big drivers at all the races, hammering it out? Because I think the product is just absolutely awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I think shifter racing is the creme de la creme of karting. Not to take anything away from what the pro guys do in X30, because I think they, race in, race out, those X30 senior guys put on one of the best races we see all weekend. And like you mentioned, David, the shifter guys, even if it's a blowout race, just watching those guys wheel that go-kart is fun to watch. And so for me, it's frustrating and tough to see, a class where it's 10 karts. Expect to see more, for the Pro Tour and for the USPKS, entry wise. But nonetheless, I think it's one of those things where, for one, it's an intimidating class, right? As much as usually drivers can go from single speed to shifter karting and pick it up pretty quickly. We've seen Mateus do it. And I'll get to Mateus in a little bit on how impressed I was with him, actually. But it's an intimidating class. You have a guy like Danny, why would you even want to go to shifter if Danny's just going to go over there and dominate, right? But it's tough, I think, for starters, and we're seeing series do it, right, where they're putting money on the line, so it's all of a sudden people are going to want to go over there and see what they've got. But shifter karting it's expensive, right? No matter what, racing's expensive, whether you're doing micro, mini, KA, X30 shifter, but shifter at the end of the day is the most expensive form of karting. It's the most expensive rebuild. It's one of those things where it's a tough class to get started in. And a lot of times before people even go into shifter, they go to cars. And we've heard Formal say it, right, where he recommends people do shifter before they go to cars, and he's been a huge voice for the shifter side of things, in terms of why it needs to grow. And I agree with him. And I think it starts with different series putting money on there, and we're seeing it this year, and I'm excited for it. And that's why I'm excited for shifter racing. And I think we need to, the KZ package, it's important to come to be in the States. And, we see it as Supernats, right? When the Europeans come over here, it becomes one of the best races we see every single year. And so that's why I think we need to promote it better, need to advertise it better. It needs to be a class that we look at as the F1 of karting. And I think it is a spectacle, and yeah, I'm in agreement with you, David.
Yeah, I certainly think shifter racing is one of the biggest spectacles you're going to find in kart racing. Even when you don't have quite as much field depth as what you would see it as the Supernat side of things, there's still a lot to look forward to. If we're looking at what's kind of stunting the growth, I'd say there's three main things. So The first one, the most pressing one, and in my opinion, the hardest one to correct is the cost. Like if you look at a K, let's start kind of from the cheapest and go up. I mean, you start with Briggs Racing, 206 Racing, kind of the cheapest way. You can more or less run a 206 weekend on a local scale for less than $150 if you do it right. Including fixed costs, it gets more expensive, but the engine costs aren't really there. You can run multiple races on one set of tires depending on the tire compound you're racing with. Engine rebuilds aren't all that frequent, and you can run a perfectly capable, extremely competitive 206 budget at most levels for really, really, really cheap. So that kind of brings a lot of the grassroots guys into the 206 side of things. Then you have the KA package, which you have more national races available to you. And for them, the costs are certainly up more from what you would expect. Certainly, the Yamaha KT100 days back pre-2017 are certainly a good bit cheaper in 100cc racing than the KAs are today. I mean, you're talking anywhere from 40 to 50 grand going into a competitive national season. And that's without even including running numerous national seasons. I mean, to be truly competitive in KA, you have to put up a good amount of money. And you're talking about engine rebuilds every 4 to 5 hours on the engine to get it at its peak life. You're talking having to have multiple engines in the set, and you're also having to talk about multiple sets of tires for practice each weekend, which kind of separates it as well as the engine from 206 yard. And it's been more on tires, more on engine. To me, KA racing is kind of that bridge from the local regional to the national level. And we see it play out where regional series KA is more popular. And on the national level, still a lot of guys will run KA. X30, the jump up isn't quite as big of a jump from a pricing standpoint as what it has been in recent years, but it's still going to be more expensive than KAs are. You're talking about now suddenly running anywhere from 6 to 7 total sessions of tires over the course of a 4-day weekend. You're talking about having really a lot of engine expenses from blueprinting. And if you have an in-house engine manufacturer and your own team building your engines, then that adds to the built-in team cost. If you're getting an engine for yourself personally, it's going to be slightly more expensive than than a KA package would be, and the rebuild hours are usually relatively similar. You're not going to get more than a race or two on an X30 engine. But the most expensive engine package by far is the shifter. The starting price is significantly more expensive. The tire wear, you're really only going to get 3 sessions the most on a set of tires before they degrade to the point where it'd be nonsensical to run them. And the rebuilding price of them, you have to get it rebuilt far more frequently than any other. There's more mechanical issues that add into the variable costs. So if you're running a shifter kart, and karting is naturally going to be a high budget sport when it comes to the national level, and there's certainly been efforts to reduce that. There's things that have been worked on that hopefully will be worked on in the future to continue to make it more affordable to some degree. Shifter is always going to be the most expensive category, no matter what you do, if you're trying to run it on the national scene. On the local scene, there's a little bit of different arguments for that, and that's not really a discussion that I'm qualified to have on that side of things. But on the national level, there's very few things that can be done to make shifter less expensive than its X30 counterparts. And so with that, the costs are one thing that drives away the massive side fields, because if you can run and get a field of 40 or 50 in X30 or 60 in KA, that's going to be more fun. You're going to do better at that than having to put together a shoestring shifter budget. The other two things are maybe less prominent in a sense, but also more fixable. I think you could argue the style of racing is something that is just not for some people. Like, a lot of people love to see the close shifter racing. It is a ton of fun when you see the Supernat style shifter races, the Rock Vegas Supernat or Rock Vegas final that we saw, where it was Formal versus the GFC boys versus Krimmers and Hunter Pickett. When you can have 4 or 5 guys fighting for the win, it is elite racing. This year already, we saw really good racing in Miami. But if you're a midfield type of guy and your kind of ceiling is a 3rd or 4th place finish, then it's a lot more tempting to go for the less physically demanding, less mentally taxing option of racing an X30, where it doesn't take quite as much thought to go through every single lap, and the learning curve isn't quite as much. And so that's another reason that I think some people go away, is it's just not quite as much bang for your buck when it comes to the racecraft side of things. And then the third thing is just simply the physical and mental demand. It kind of goes along. The learning curve to get good in a shifter takes a while. And I know we've seen Dalton Haynes, for example, come on and get a national podium in shifter right away. We've seen Connor Zilisch do it in the past, and we've seen Mateus Morgado in recent times adapt to shifter racing very well. But those are kind of the exceptions. The reality is, if you want to be consistently really good in the shifter and you're not the most elite of elite drivers, it's a year-long process, really, 1 to 2 years to really get shifter down. I mean, Talon Yackel is one of the best shifter drivers in the U.S. that we have currently right now, and it's taken him a couple of years to get to that point. Michael Riccio, the same sort of thing. It's like a 2-year process. Gavin Bailiff started shifter racing more frequently at the end of 2022, and he's just now getting to the point where you would say his results um, match his single speed efforts. And when you run in a class like shifter, where really we don't have any feeder series or feeder categories into it, there's going to be a learning curve that there simply isn't quite that much in the X30 side of things. Like, you can't prepare really for shifter racing prior to getting a shifter. It's a whole new animal. Some guys can adapt really quick. I mean, at the end of the day, it's still driving a kart. You're still going to be able to find speed. But with that learning curve and that amount of physical demands and the mental demand that can come for some people racing a shifter, I think that's the last thing that kind of brings people away. And so the result is you have some people that are really fast in a single speed that just don't want to try it, which, power to them. It's kind of something that if we had more incentive, more money coming into it, maybe that would change things. If they got more spotlight, that would certainly change things and maybe bring some of those top single speed guys in. The midfield is always going to be a questionable thing because, again, if you're in the midfield, why not run a KA category when it's cheaper? There's 60 people in it. It's more affordable. And the style of racing is more conducive to close wheel-to-wheel action every single lap. So I think the way to kind of solve that midfield is maybe you bring in more introductory shifter classes. You have more restrictions on it, kind of similar to what Pro Tour did back in the day with S2, S4, and other shifter programs as well. Maybe even bringing in some kind of mini shifter categories. We've seen the 60cc shifters out there in the past. I think that's something to explore as well. So I think that's kind of how you build the midfield, is bringing in a more feeder series. I think on the bigger scale with the upfront drivers, you need more of a purse. You need kind of more direct incentive for those drivers to join in. And then the last part of it, the financial part of it. I mean, karting is always naturally going to have that uncomfortable discussion about a budget. But on the shifter side of things, I think it's more prevalent than others. And until the whole industry finds a way to kind of bring that down just a bit, I think there's always going to be some de-incentivized points to shifter racing. And I mean, I think there's certainly room to grow the field. I want to see it grow. I want to see those 30, 40 car shifter fields at every pro race we go to. But I think it's going to take some work, and there's some natural disadvantages that's always going to carry.